How are you?
Good.
Okay, good. Good to see you.
Yes.
I'm actually not.
Not
I'm not
माझा
seeing you, but your
हाँ,
side. Yeah,
मेरा आवाज.
I know. I know. Anyway, I'm leaving for some meeting, so I thought I will just say you hi and go.
Okay, okay. No worries, no worries.
Yeah. Okay. Bye bye. All the best.
Bye, bye, and see you.
Nikita.
See you soon.
Yeah. Nikita, take over.
Okay, ma'am. Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for the day 5th of the Ocean Literacy course. Ocean Literacy, Know Your Planet Beyond the Land. Yesterday, we have started with the part 2 of the Ocean Literacy course, where we have learned about the concepts of sustainability related with the ocean. And today, we have with us Dr. Reshma Pitale, ma'am, who will take up today's session on the topic Ocean Biodiversity of India. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank
It's
you.
my it is my privilege to introduce to you all Dr. Reshma Pitale. Ma'am is a zoologist with BNHS. She has
Hello.
pursued her doctoral studies with intertidal areas of Maharashtra as her focus area. She is interested in understanding marine invertebrate taxonomy, diversity, and ecology. Her doctoral study aimed at studying species composition and distribution of polyclad flatworms from the intertidal areas of Maharashtra. Since she joined BNHS in 2011, Dr. Reshma has been involved in environment impact assessments, marine biodiversity assessments, and identifying ecologically important coastal areas in Maharashtra. Her areas of expertise are taxonomy, marine biodiversity, and ecology. Without further ado, I request Reshma ma'am to begin with your session. Over to you, Reshma ma'am.
Uh, just give me 2 minutes, huh? 2 minutes. Just
Okay,
give
ma'am.
me. Hello.
Ma'am, you are not audible.
Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, now you are audible.
Yeah. Just give me 2 minutes. I have a call from my director. Sorry for the interference. I'll just come back in 2 minutes, huh? Please. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Yeah. Sorry for the interference. Yeah. So this is Dr. Reshma, and I'll be talking about marine biodiversity, especially focusing on the coastal habitats and the biodiversity we have. So as you can see on the slide, it talks about it states that marine biodiversity and what's in our backyard. So it's what does it indicate? What is there in our backyard? What does that mean? So actually, I was referring to the coastal habitats. Coastal habitats are just there in our backyards, not literally in backyards, but something which we can see, something which we always visit and experience about. If we talk about the deep sea or the pelagic oceans or other parts of the ocean, we can't see or we can't experience the diversity or how this ocean looks like or feels like. But the coastal habitat is something which especially the people who lives in a coastal region or a coastal district definitely knows about the coastal habitats like mangroves, sea grasses, or rocky shores, sandy shores, etc. So that is why this title is about what is there in our backyard. And in most cases, we experience this habitat. We know these are mangroves. We know, oh, these are the sandy shores. We go for some recreational activities to these shoreline areas, but yet we are not always aware about the aware about the diversity or importance of these habitat in overall marine or ocean ecosystem. To Before we start with, I would just like to talk about the BNHS. BNHS, where I work for, Bombay Natural History Society, is more than 140 years old institute, and it works on research-based conservation, so not just for marine areas but other parts of the country for different habitats and the species and so on. To begin with, again, I was referring to the coastal habitat. So, what does this mean? Coastal habitats, the intertidal area. As the name suggests, as the word suggests, intertidal is something between the tides. So, some part of the ocean which experiences the tidal inundation. That means the high tide comes, water resides, the low tide we experience, the area get exposed during the low tide, and then again the high tide comes. So that's the simple meaning. The area between the tides, intertidal area, or the coastal area. So what is so special about this coastal area? Why we have to talk about it or discuss about it? And what is so special than the other part of the ocean or other part of the sea? So this coastal area has a very interesting fact. One which I always talk about is this, as I have explained to you, that this area is something which is between the terrestrial habitat and also between the actual sea or a deep sea, something which is in between. What sort of conservation issues or what sort of conservation uh, uh, eh, this area must be experiencing? So one is this area experiences something which goes wrong or something which is getting from the terrestrial habitat, and something which is happening, some any disastrous activity or anything happening from the ocean side, which also get to coastal habitat, and then it experiences the both. So technically, in one line, it experiences the pressure, it experiences the influence from both the sides. So for example, we always talk about pollution or the any industry which uh, goes into the ocean. So from where it goes into the ocean? It goes from the coastal habitats, not that directly it is going into the deep sea or in some depth of the ocean. So that is why this coastal area always has a very interesting factors, very interesting natural factors, and very interesting uh, uh, human interference and the conservation factor. So this stretch is also has an importance in our life because it also gives us uh, local fishing, small scale fishing, it's opportunity for small scale fishing. There are a lot of tourism opportunities. There are a lot of adventurous sports, recreational activities which are happening in these areas. So that way, this area is also ecologically as well as economically important. So what are these habitats? What are those habitats which contribute to coastal areas? One is of course the mangrove, sea grasses, coral reefs, rocky areas, sandy areas, creeks, estuaries, mudflats, and so on. So we will go one by one, talking about our understanding these habitats and their importance and what diversity these habitats hold and what importance these habitats has in the overall marine ecosystem. So starting with rocky shore, something which is of my personal favorite too, because if you can see the picture, you may see there is a difference in the physical structure, because one pictures you can see there are pebbles, there are boulders, and then some areas which are just flat, made up of rocky patches. These are just flat rocky areas, but engraved with some pools or some rocky pools. So this sort of a physical diversity uh, you see in the areas, but this again eventually contributes to the interesting biodiversity as well. So as much as physical diversity you have in that habitat, which corresponds to diversity, biological diversity in that area too. But of course, there are some limitations also, because as you can see, these are the low tide feature of these areas. So when water resides, this whole area is exposed to sunlight. There is no flushing water in these areas. Only you can see those rocky pools which are holding some water, but otherwise there is no flushing of water during the low tides. So almost 5 to 6 hours where there is no water. There is no there the animals are exposed to intense sunlight. So obviously there is also a issue of a DO and many other water parameters. So the organisms which can use or which inhabit these areas are also very interesting and also adaptable or also adapted to this sort of an environment. Rocky Shore is one of the highest diversity holding habitats in the coastal areas. So that's very interesting to see how these animals are organized and arranged along these physical structures. So this is one of the rock pool for which
Ma'am, sorry to disturb you.
yeah.
Some of the participants have the issue that the you are not audible.
Okay. But
Yeah.
am I audible to you?
Yes, ma'am, but sometimes the voice is not clear. The
Okay.
range of the voice is sometimes low, sometimes high.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now it is clear.
Yeah, ma'am, it is
Okay.
clear.
So yeah, so you can see in the picture, it is a rock pool, which was of a depth of approximately 1 or 2 meters, and there is a particular structure, the way these organisms organized themselves on the peripheral areas of these rock pools. So these are some of the pictures from these rock pools, the various rock pools. You can see the colorful diversity we have. We have zooanthus, and then this flower-like structure is sea anemone. Then we have hydroids. Then there are parts of sponges you can see. So this sort of a colorful diversity we have in our rock pools. So I think you can imagine how interesting these areas to study and to research and talk about. Vertical zonation, I would just quickly go and talk about this is because uh, as I have mentioned, there's these organisms due to certain parametric or certain environmental conditions and the physical differences in the habitat. These organisms prefer their patches, prefer their, and they form some sort of a zonation. So there is not just the horizontal zonation, like organisms are organized themselves from high tide to low tide areas, but also there are some vertical zonation which you can observe, like some of the boulders or rocky walls across the vertical height. You can see some of the organisms are, inhabiting these areas. So these organisms are also very particular, like some sort of a barnacle, some sort of a shells, like periwinkles we call them. which are grazers, which can sustain themselves in a very low water, or keep them hydrated for a long time. Those sort of organisms prefer these area. You can see these vertical rocky wall and these white structures where these barnacles and periwinkles are uh, inhabiting these areas. And then you can see the lower areas where these platform like structures, and then there are some watery areas which water has retained during the low tide, and you can see the algae and the other organisms have flourished in those areas, but not on rock the rocky wall. So that this is how this differentiation is. Some of the organisms are okay, fine and adaptable to low hydrated, low oxygenated and heavy intense sunlight areas, but some of the areas where you need to have water flushing, and many other physiological and environmental conditions. So this is again very interesting to see how these organisms organized themselves or zoned themselves into particular areas, and this is very interesting to study. These again some of the pictures from the low tide areas of the rocky shore. You can see the diversity of algae from each of these picture, and then left corner picture, which is green color zooanthus mat, which is a relative of coral, I would say, and then the sea anemone, the red color sea anemone, which is very common in coastline of Maharashtra from Raigad to Sindhudurga. On the right side picture, you can see some brown color patch occupied by some calcareous algae and the sargassum, the brown color algae. But this patch is not mud. These are actually sand tubes formed by some sort of a polychaete worm, some kind of a worm which form this kind of a tube. So these are the interesting structures also you can see, which are created by these small, tiny organisms or creatures, I would say. So it's very interesting and uh, interesting to see and learn these animals and ecosystem. So importance, of course, very simply, these rocky shores are physical structures. So obviously they give the stability to the shoreline. And then some of the sedentary species can occupy these spaces, because sedentary species which do not move, require some strong base, some hard structures to develop and flourish, develop into the colonies and flourish. So they require this sort of hard structures, and rocky shores is ideal for this kind of organisms. Carbon sequestration and complex ecology, because the rocky shore has a greatest diversity of marine algal form, macroalgae or marine algal forms. So obviously that contributes to the carbon sequestration. Not as a rocky patches contribute to the carbon sequestration. Please don't get confused. The algal forms, the biological forms, which contributes to the carbon sequestration. I have mentioned in the last paragraph, if you can see, it's a natural laboratory. I think in past 2-3 slides, I have been constantly saying it is very interesting to see how these organisms are arranged over the zone from high tide to low tide, how these organisms preferred a particular micro habitat like base of the boulder, or the vertical wall of the rocky wall or something like that. So it is very interesting to see how this organization is. And secondly, there are particular fashion which is known that particular kind of organism will prefer a particular kind of habitat. And therefore, if anything is wrong with the climate, if anything is not ideal with the other water parametric condition, then these communities are changes. This community shows the definite shift from their natural areas to some other microhabitat or some lower areas of the coastline. And these are like direct indicators that there is something is some changes are happening in the environment or a climate, I would say. Of course, these are not 1 or 2 days of changes that you consider. You need a data for 3, 4, 5 years, and then you can conclude something like this. But then in climatic research, or research which talks about the climate change and change in biodiversity, change in community, this kind of habitats are very ideal to learn and understand how these changes are happening. The minute changes, which perhaps we cannot capture by data in one day, but you can see that in the 3 years, 4 years, 10 years data set. So that is something very, very interesting, and that makes any researchers in the coastal habitat, that rocky shores are very interesting, since this is a natural laboratory in this way. Next are sandy shores. I think we all know sandy shores because we sometimes in our childhood we have collected shells, and then we have played with the crabs which are running here and there on the sandy patches. And if not this, we have at least experienced a bhelpuri in Mumbai along the some of the interesting tourist beaches, or any other areas of the country of having a sandy shore. So these sandy shores, as you can see in the picture, and in fact, if even if you have experienced and visited personally, actually, you may find that there is nothing on these shores. There are no diversity. Like on the rocky shores pictures, if you have seen, there is a diversity which is evident. You can see that there is a algae, there is a zooanthus, animals, corals, and many other species lying on the rocky patches. But what about sandy shores? You can't see nothing. So it does that mean that there is no diversity, or there are no biological fauna, or the fauna and flora lying in these sandy areas? No, not at all, not like that. There is a very typical specific fauna which prefers the sandy area, and which stays or inhabits the tiny spaces between these sand particles, which are in scientific language it is interstitial spaces. And these macro and neobenthic organisms, like these tiny worms, tiny shells, inhabit these spaces, and this is how the sandy shores are flourished. So if you take a small patch of a sand, and if you see with a particular mesh size of a sieve, you can see lot of worms diversity. You can see number of different shells and crabs and so on. So there are different types of sandy shores also based on the kind of physical structure they have. Like there are some sandy shores which are very flat, broad. There are some sandy shores which are like steep, directly getting into the water. So that sort of differences, physical differences are there, and accordingly these shores are named. What is the importance? So, of course, I think we all know that the turtle female lay their eggs into the on the same sandy shore every year. I think we all have heard this story about the turtle laying eggs on the sandy shore and the same sandy and also the other importance, like recreational activities, so which creates a small remuneration or revenue for the local areas. It's a source of a sand and many other ecological contributions these areas has. So of course the sandy shores are important that way. Sand dune habitat, I will just quickly go through this because if you have experienced some very dry sandy patches towards the terrestrial, towards the city side of the sandy shore, if you have observed, this very dry sandy patches has a very typical peculiar vegetation sometimes, which is actually collectively called as a sand dune habitat, and which is also very, very important in maintaining the sandy shore, maintaining the slope of the sandy shore, the physical structure of the sandy shore. It is also a barrier that heavy wave action is happening, then it is a very good barrier to uh, 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 then go back to the mangroves. We all have heard that how mangroves are important. They protect the shore, they protect us from the tsunamis. So, what is that so special in these mangroves? How they're different from the other plants and plants and trees we have in the forest or any other areas? Uh, so their whole structure is the whole anatomy, the whole body structure is that way that they can sustain in these swampy, muddy areas. See, you can compare the tree, which requires a comparatively hard soil structure, whereas mangroves are growing into the very soft, muddy areas, swampy areas, watery areas. There is no proper drainage available. Still, this mangroves can sustain. There is no very low oxygen. There are many areas where there is a very low oxygen available. Still, there is no everyday water inundation. Still, these mangroves can sustain in this kind of area. So, what is so special about these mangroves? Before we understand that, I would just highlight that mangrove plants or the mangrove forest is one of the richest in carbon sequestration, and it sequests carbon 2 to 4 times more than a very matured tropical forest. So, a terrestrial tropical forest जितना कार्बन सिक्वेस्ट्रेशन करता है उससे 2 to 4% हाईएस्ट कार्बन सिक्वेस्ट्रेशन mangrove forests are doing. So coming back to the anatomy of the mangroves, what is so special about this? So they have these special structures, the breathing and the arcing roots, which helps them to hold this very soft habitat. And also they have a salt exempting leaves. Why they required a salt exempting leaves? Because they're always in a high salinity area. They're always in an area where there is no proper inundation is happening. Still, they can survive with this high salinity, high saline areas because they have this special breathing roots and they have these special leaves which excrete this extra salt getting absorbed into the body. So, what is the importance of mangroves? Of course, because of their strong structures, they protect the shoreline. They help us defending the tsunamis and high surges. Interestingly, there are very important fish and shell species which prefer mangrove areas as their nursery ground. I mean, there are evidences where some species travel back to mangroves from their ocean or deep sea areas just for and birth to the juvenile. And so it's a very good source of a fish. It's a very good source of a shellfish, and obviously gives a lot of recreational opportunities, fuel wood, and many other medicinal benefits. Okay. Uh, then now I would like to ask you. You can see this muddy and swampy area. Forget the mangrove part. We have talked about the mangrove part and understood why these and how these mangroves are important. But what about these muddy areas, the open muddy areas in the creek? Are these muddy areas hold any fauna, any flora? Are these open swampy areas important? This looks like a very dirty places at a first glance, if you can see. But still, these areas are important ecologically. How? Because these areas, similar to the sandy shore, holds a many worms and the shells diversity. If anyone have any time tasted the oysters, which are coming from these areas, the oysters and many other shells, if you have are coming from these areas. So this open, swampy, muddy, so-called dirty areas are not actually dirty. These are equally ecologically important areas. Provides a open space for a lot of migratory bird species as their refuge site, as their nursery, as their feeding site. As well as it's a space for uh, uh, okay, so this is one of the example from Mumbai where every year on these open mudflat, lakhs of flamingos come here. Many other weather species come here and forage. Right? Mm. Uh, Coming back to seagrasses, as the name suggests, they look like grass. There some of the species are look like grass, which is the terrestrial grass, but they exclusively grow in the marine areas, and hence the name is seagrasses. Again, the very interesting fact about this, of course, these are plant materials, so they do photosynthesis. In the photosynthesis, they do a carbon sequestration. So if you take an example, the 1 square meter of a seagrass area can generate almost 10 liters of oxygen in the photosynthetic process. So that's the importance, that's the capacity of this seagrass area, and that is why Very commonly, these areas are known as lungs of the sea because these are the areas where the more oxygen is generated, the carbon is sink, and there are many other sedimentological processes are happening, and that is why these areas are extremely important in maintaining the marine ecosystem. Biological fauna, there are many species who feeds on the sea grasses. That importance is there, but apart from that, they also have a role in maintaining the ecological balance of the coastal as well as other areas of the sea. So these are some of the areas where we have very considerable and diverse seagrass patches. Starting from Gulf of Kutch, there are few patches in Maharashtra. We don't have much diversity of seagrasses. We have only one or two species, but other areas like Gulf of Kutch, Gulf of Mannar, Lakshadweep, Andaman have the highest seagrass species diversity. Interesting habitat is coral reef. We all see in Discovery and other channels and many other documentaries, we see a beautiful picture of a coral reef, very colorful. The fishes are moving and different coral species, their structures and so on. So why there is so much of importance to coral reef? Let's see why this habitat is important. So coral is species. It's a biological habitat, I would say. And why it is habitat? Because it creates a structure, the calcium carbonate structure, the reef structure, which also gives the space, shelter, food to other organisms in the area, and that is why these reef areas are important. The coral animal has an importance in the ecosystem as well as this structure, this calcium carbonate structure has an importance in the ecology of coastal areas or in the nearshore water areas. So, what are these? How this coral animal looks like? So, basically, what you see in the bigger picture is actually a reef structure which you see even if you dive into the waters. But actually, these animals are tiny flower-like structure. These are colonies which you see. The actual single animal is a very tiny flower-like structure. And interesting factor is you must have heard about the coral bleaching. So what is this bleaching is about? These tiny flowers hold a algal material into their cell, which helps the animal to do a photosynthesis. Because algae can do photosynthesis, these algal material is based or grow in the cells of the these flower-like coral structure. They do photosynthesis for themselves as well as from the for the coral animal. And these zooxanthellae or these algal material imparts the color, and hence this coral animal shows color. Oh. So basically, this association is very important. When the temperature increases, we see that when the climate change happens, the temperature increases, the corals are bleaching. So what is happening actually is when temperature increases, this zooxanthellae or these algal material is very sensitive. Even a 1 degree of change in the temperature, these algal material die. This completely get their cells completely get destroyed, and hence you can see the white color coral reef absolutely because there are no algal material available within this coral structure or coral anatomy. So this is actually known as coral bleaching. We have Gulf of Kutch, one of the interesting coral reef. Then Maharashtra has patches whole across the coastline, a patchy reef across the coastline. We have a coral reef in Malvan, and then Goa and other areas of the coastline where there are coastal patches as well as islands of the coral reef. We have more than 200 plus species of corals in India. Now it's all about the different habitats, coastal habitats we have, how this biological faunal or floral structure helps to support and create these habitats. So there are physical structures and as well as there are animal made structures, bioengineered structure on which also the other animals grow, on which also the main organism who structured these material, for them also this structure is important. And this is how this ecosystem, this habitat is formed. Now we'll get into the diversity part of these ecosystem, this coastal ecosystem or coastal habitat, and we also see how these animals are interact with each other. So, for example, like talked about the algae. Algae can do photosynthesis. They create their own food with the help of sunlight and the photosynthesis material, photosynthesis process. Uh, so these are the primary producers. These creates energy into the ocean, and then these primary producers are eaten up by some herbivore organisms like plankton, zooplanktons, like some worms, like some shells, and so on. And these animals are further eaten up by some other organisms, the filter feeders and the suspension feeders. Then these organisms are again eaten up by the predators. And finally, when this whole story is completed, the organisms die. The detritus material is eaten up by some of the scavenging organisms. So this is how this whole food structure is, and this is how these animals are important for each other too, and this is how there are interactions happening in the coastline. Apart from this interaction, there is also interaction regarding the shelter, like they share their spaces, they share the shell structure, they share the structure or the skeletal which they have created, and so on. Starting with algae. Algae, I think I have talked about that, how they are important in carbon sequestration, they are primary producers, and so on. There is a lot of importance of algae in the practical aspects also, because they have very interesting biological components or biochemical components which are which has a pharmaceutical importance, medicinal importance, and these bioactive compounds are even important in research, in cancer research, and so on. So these algae not just help creating energy into the ocean. These algae not just give shelter to other organisms, but are also biochemically important, and for many other factors. Sponges are soft structures, uh, which are, as the name suggests, they are sponges or the poriferans. Technical or the scientific name is porifera. As the name suggests, they hold a lot of uh, pores in their anatomy, and that is why the name is. And through these pores, they are actually filtering the water. And this is how in this filtration process, almost some bacteria and some viruses and many other factors are getting filtered, and which helps in purification of water. So again, as you can see in the picture, they have some structure which again gives the shelter and space for other organisms. They are food to someone. They poriferans or the sponges have excellent diversity of bioactive compounds, and there are a lot of research happening worldwide regarding their use in different industries, whether it is pharmaceutical industry, medicinal properties, cancer research, evolutionary research, and so on. Corals, zoanthids, and sea anemone, their relatives, they have they create some calcium carbonate structure, and they have their critical role in maintaining the ecosystem or ecological balance in the ocean system. These are some of the pictures. You can see how colorful the sea anemones and sea fan in the, and these pictures are captured in the coastal areas of the Maharashtra, not from the deep sea or any other areas. These are just few meters down the coastal areas. Some worms, some type of a worm. Polyclads, polyphids, and nematodes. So these are the technical names for these worms. You can see in the picture on the right side. These sandy tubes are actually formed by tiny 2, 3, 4 centimeter size polychaete worms. Can you imagine? And how these beautiful structures, the whole patches of rocky areas are completely occupied. Sometimes you can see in the left corner picture, this is actually a rocky wall, a boulder, on which the whole area is occupied by the polychaete worm, forming these sandy tubes. how interesting it is and how interesting biological architecture it is. So this is how understanding these animals more and more about their ecology, about their behavior and their structures is very, very interesting. Apart from this polychaete also has a very similar function like earthworm has in the fields. Like what earthworm do? Earthworm do the rotation or bioturbation in the in the sediment. It moves the sediment, it goes down, take the material up, and so on. So they're burrowing, feeding, reworking of the activity helps uh, uh, similarly, the polychaetes do the similar kind of a role in the marine ecosystem. So they basically work in the reworking of the benthic sediment. So this is again one of the interesting role they play in the ecosystem. Then barnacles, brachyurans, and anomura. Barnacles, the one which you can see as tiny shell-like structures just behind this text, and then the brachyurans and anomurans are actually the type of different types of crab. So they are basically scavengers. So they are the Swachhata Abhiyan people in the team members in the ocean. They clean the ocean by eating up or by putting on the material. Gastropods and bivalves, I think we see these organisms in their childhood. The beautiful shells of different shapes and sizes on rocky shores or on a on a sandy area. So these shells also have different ecological functions because some of these shells are herbivorous, like they eat on plant material. Some of the shells are scavengers. Some of the shells holds a very interesting toxin, and these toxins has again the biopharmaceutical importance. There is a lot of research happening on those toxins and so on. So this is how these shells are important. Bivalves are basically the oysters and the other in Marathi we called as shimpल्या. So these bivalves is basically they have a two valves, so that is why the name is bivalve. And these, of course, they are the food material for many coastally human community, and also they are great calcium carbonate. So further moving to sea cucumber, starfishes, and sea urchin, I think starfish is something which you can imagine. We see in many pictures the star shape like organism, which is a starfish. Sea cucumber is one of the important organism, and the sea urchin, which is there on the right corner of the picture, you can see. So these are again deposit and suspension feeder. They are interesting nutrient cycling role they have in the ecosystem, and increase the productivity of the benthic areas. Benthic areas is the sea floor. So they have a very interesting role in maintaining this sea floor areas by doing the nutrient cycling, by feeding on the suspension material, cleaning the area, and so on. One interesting factor is the sea cucumber, the one in the middle. The cucumber-like structure it has, this animal has, and hence the name is sea cucumber. So what they do is they basically increase the alkalinity and dissolve the inorganic carbon during their digestive process. And what happens is they release ammonia and facilitate the calcification of other organisms like corals, and maintain the pH or sea water buffering capacity. So see how these one organism, their physiological processes are helping the other organism in maintaining and creating the important biological structure. So when we say that the coral are important, but coral to form the calcium carbonate structure, there has to be a proper environmental condition. There has to be a proper pH maintained so that this calcium carbonate structure can get formed. There has to be a chemistry which there has to be a chemical structures, chemical component in a particular amount, and which are maintained by many other organisms in that area. So that is why not just the one organism or one habitat, but all these organisms and habitats are interlinked, connected in some or other way, in some or other relationship, and hence conserving or importance of these all sets of biota, all sets of physical structures is important for the ecosystem. Again, there is another animal called as ascidian, which is, you can see how these ascidians are like colonial structures spreaded over the any hard structure. These ascidians are actually food to many sea slugs, many shells, and many flatworms, or the many kinds of worms feed on this habitat. Again, this ascidians also very interesting bioactive compounds and has an importance in different research. Flagship species, I would say, flagship species like mammals. There are in and around the coastal areas. Obviously, these are not the coastal species. The dolphin, sharks, they don't come actually into the intertidal area. They are in the near shore waters or in the deep sea waters. Dolphin comes to close to the near shore areas or a coastline, but whales and turtles are mostly in the deep sea areas or in the ocean of the areas. So they come only during the um, May. All right. So next in the discussion is about multi-stressors of the changing world. So what is that which is giving stress to the marine environment? So what is stress? Basically, we talk nowadays, we talk a lot about stress, which are, we face some problem in the office, we get stressed out. We have some personal problems, we get stressed out. Students get stressed out because there is lot of study, exams, and peer pressures and achievements and so on. So what is stress? Basically, the ideal parameters in the environment where human beings are living is not ideal, get changes, the situations, the circumstances get changed. We have to deal with the new situation and circumstances, which creates a stress for ourselves. Similarly, exactly similarly, what happens is to these organisms, if the temperature increases, the parameter changes. If the temperature is increasing, the salinity, the saline condition of the ocean changes. If saline condition is changing, the pH is changing. The pH is changing. There are many other factors which are changing. We have already seen how pH is important. It's a simple chemistry. pH is required to maintain the calcium carbonate structure. What if the pH into the acidic areas, the calcium carbonate structure will be porous or it will get dissolved. But there are many organisms who has the hard shell structure. The corals have the hard calcium carbonate structure. Then why? Then what will happen if the parameters are changing? So similarly, the changing world, the pollution, the changing temperature, changing atmosphere is creating a stressful situation to these organisms, to these habitats in maintaining their ecological, physiological processes. And that is why these issues are there with which we are dealing to protect and conserve the habitat. So this is the structure which I was talking about. If the atmospheric CO2 is increasing, atmospheric carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide is increasing, it affects the temperature. If it affects the temperature, temperature is changing, then it influences the plant productivity negatively. It influences the environment in the ocean areas, which may cause the storminess. Then the storminess will have obviously have the other physical disastrous effect on the ocean and the coastline. The increased temperature also contribute to the sea level rise. If sea level rise is happening, the sediment plume will change. If these things are changing, the physical structure of the rocky shore, the sandy shores, the mudflat will change. If this is changing, it will overall influencing the ocean currents. Then ocean currents will again contribute to the storminess. And you can see in this picture how the one thing is related to other, how the one thing is contributing to many cascading effects, which are eventually destructing the habitats, the species, and the fishing capacity, the ecological and economical. benefits of the ocean. In simple, uh, simply, the ocean acidification I have already talked about. If the carbon dioxide is more, it will change the pH. If the pH is more acidic, the carbonic acid will be formed and it will dissolve the calcium carbonate structure of many shells, corals, and so on. Then we will go to the microplastic pollution, which is something very, very closely related to our day-to-day activities. Have anyone experienced that they use the personal care materials or personal care products where they have used the scrub, the small tiny particles in their body washes or the face washes? Have you observed this material is made up of plastic or any material which will not get dissolved in the water? What will happen if these tiny material gets directly into the ocean, directly into the water? The fish will get confused. eh, And apart from this, there are tiny, the plastic, the whole bag or a thermophole, because of the pressure, currents, and so on, it will get and from one place to other. And this is the problem of a microplastic in the ocean. So it's not just the plastic, it is about the derivatives of this plastic which is affecting the ocean. This is the mangrove deforestation and burns. This is one of the factor which we observed while doing survey in the Maharashtra area, especially because I worked me on the Maharashtra area, so I can give example from this place that in somewhere in some of the areas these burns are formed. And what happened due to these burns? The water inundation, the current, the natural flow of tidal water is uh, uh, and hence the water does not reaches to mangroves and eventually these mangroves die, and then the area is and this is the mm, coastal construction and reclamation. Of course, I think now by now you will understand why these habitats are coastal habitats are important, why the coastal habitat के साथ the fauna and floral diversity important, how they are important for each other and they maintain the overall coastal ecosystem. And then if suddenly we are working and we are completely destroying one habitat, we are completely reclaiming one habitat, what will happen to these construct? What will happen to this ecosystem balance? I think we can imagine if there is a complete destruction of a habitat, what will happen to these areas? And that is why this coastal construction and reclamations are disastrous for the coastal conservation. Then unregulated sand mining, similar example, the sandy shore is one of the habitat, one of the key habitat in the coastal area. If we are doing a sand mining, precious sand mining, what will happen to the area or the worms and the shells which are living within these tiny spaces of the sand? What will happen to them? If the entire patch of land, entire patch of a habitat is removed from that area, isn't this is a complete destruction of that area ecologically? Yes. So this is the effect of. Then these are the some example of plastic pollution. How this mangrove is holding the plastic which is washed during the high tide surges, captured by these mangroves, and then there is a reclamation happening. Then there is a pollution or the chemical material which is getting released into the natural environment. Then there is a marine traffic which is affect the marine mammals and turtles and many other such megafauna components. And then there are other factors like oil spill, which obviously affects sea in multiple ways, like not just the chemical component, it also forms the layer over the water, which will affect the oxygen penetration, oxygen dissolve in the water. Then this material gets stick on the yeah, the tourism, plastic pollution, and go which we have already uh, talked about. So yeah, that's it from my side. Uh, I'll be happy to have if anyone has any questions, suggestions, or Any questions or queries?
I request the participants to kindly unmute and go ahead with the questions.
Any questions or suggestions you have? Any experience from these habitats? Some participants may have to suggest.
Good afternoon, Reshma ma'am.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Ma'am, actually, I don't have a serious question, but one simple question is there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Actually, this all the information what you are told us.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a regulatory authority who is maintaining all the datas of all this habitat, then coastal biodiversities at various special locations?
Yes, of course. So there are a lot of regulations and rules and protection is given to these habitats. To the species also. So, for example, there are some schedules, there are some rules. So, we cannot collect species from particular area or a particular type of a species we cannot collect. And then there are ministry, then there is a forest department, and there are many other coastal regulations are in place which protect these coastal habitats and the animal. There are many examples like coastal regulation zone is there which protect the which is exclusively for the coastal habitats. Then there are environmental protection law. Then there are a law for the law for some species. There is a law for mangrove forest and so on. So there is a lot of protection and rules regulation are in place for the species and habitat.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Is there any question from any participants?
You can also write to me if you have any questions or suggestions at rd.pitale@bnhs.org if you have any questions or concerns to share.
So, ma'am, I think there is no question from any participants.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you so much, ma'am, for such an informative session. We truly appreciate your expertise and mentorship. Thank you to all participants for attending the session. With this, we complete the first week of the course. Our next session is scheduled on Monday, 24th of March at 3 p.m. The topic for the Monday session is threats to the national security arising from the sea, which will be conducted by Captain Dr. K.K. Agnihotri. Kindly note that we have holiday for next 2 days. Looking forward to seeing you all on Monday. Happy weekend and happy World Water Day in advance. Thank you so much to all.
Thank you. Thank you, team.
Thank you, ma'am.